Right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Cassie. I'm the campaign coordinator with the Sierra Club in Wisconsin. This discussion is our panel about the Dark Waters movie and the status of PFAS in Wisconsin. This event is co-hosted by Sierra Club and Milwaukee Riverkeeper. And I also want to give a special thanks to Swank and to participant media who enabled so many of you to access the movie for free online before today's panel. Before I jump into introduction and content, I just wanted to walk through a couple of settings that you should see if you are on this on video and not just by phone. So all of you, because you're attendees, will be muted throughout this. However, if you have joined this on your computer, you should have a chat box. That chat box is where you can put questions related to tech. So if you're not hearing someone properly, if you're confused about where to click or need help, you can submit that in the chat box. That's the little chat icon. There is a Q&A box as well, and you can use that to submit questions that you have for the panelists. And we recommend that you do that throughout the meeting. We'll have a decent amount of time at the end. So tonight's speakers, we have Jason Lowry from the Wisconsin DNR. We have Lance Green with Friends of Starkweather Creek, Cheryl Nen with Milwaukee Riverkeeper, and Doug Oetzinger, who is the former mayor of Marinette and an activist. And again, special thanks to the many groups that helped make this happen. Before we get in, I just want to do really high level what are PFAS, and many of our speakers will talk about this. And if you watched Dark Waters, you probably are familiar with this information as well. So PFAS comes from many different sources, and it gets into our bodies through water supplies or through groundwater contamination, through soil contamination. So this moves off of many common surfaces that we have and gets into our waterways and causes negative health effects if you consume them. And I know many of our speakers will talk about this more, but women, people who are pregnant, and young children are disproportionately impacted by this. So during this webinar, I recommend that you post what you're learning on social media. You use these hashtags, PFAS and no PFAS, Wisconsin, no PFAS WI. You can tag Sierra Club and Milwaukee Riverkeeper to let us know that you're tuning in, and please do share the information that you're learning tonight. And again, please participate fully. So I see that chat lighting up with people letting us know where you're tuning in from. That's really exciting. Please do submit your questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can at the end. And thank you all for joining us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Jason Lowry.
Okay, can everybody hear me? So thanks Cassie, and thanks to Sierra Club for having me come on and have the opportunity to talk about what Wisconsin is doing about PFAS, and also thanks to all the participants who are here listening and asking questions and participating. So I'm going to just talk real briefly, run through some of the things that the DNR is doing to address PFAS. As many of you know, for this current administration, clean drinking water and PFAS are both priorities. So first of all, we do have a newly created and now fully staffed Office of Emerging Contaminants at the DNR, so we could address any types of emerging contaminants, but right now we're mainly focused on PFAS. So just starting yesterday, our policy director started, and her name is Mimi Johnson. She came over from the Department of Health. I'm the technical operations director. We have a risk communicator named Anna K. Kruger, and then we also have an executive assistant, and we have 2 PFAS researchers. They're technically in the drinking water Matt Silver in drinking water, and Pat Gorski, Pat Gorski with surface water. So it's a multi-program effort where even though we have this office, we're having to interact with all the different programs in the Environmental Management Division. So some of you may know that Governor Evers, with Executive Order number 40, he started the Wisconsin State Agency PFAS Task Force, also known as WISPAC. So basically what this is the various state agencies getting together and coming up with proposed actions related to PFAS. And we also are getting input from a couple advisory groups, a local citizens advisory group, and then a local or citizens, and then a local government advisory group. And all those proposed actions, both from the state agencies and from the advisory groups, those will all be compiled in a final report. That report was supposed to be done by July 1st, but because of COVID, everything got delayed. So we're looking at still hopefully getting that done by the end of the year. Next. We also have Governor Evers is part of a group called the it's a Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers Conference, I believe. But they started something called the Great Lakes Task Force. So maybe mentioned later in this presentation, the federal government is a little bit behind in some ways, the states with regard to PFAS. So this is a way for the Great Lakes states, which includes the EPA Region 5 states, but also Pennsylvania, New York, and then Canadian provinces of Quebec and Ontario, basically just getting together, collaborating, finding out what we're doing, what we're finding out with our research, what type of research we're proposing to do, what's working well and what's not working well. So we can learn from each other, and that'll help kind of shed some light down our path. So there are a few different subgroups within there. There's the directors, which is Preston Cole, Secretary Cole is on that group, along with our environmental management director, Darcy Foss. I'm representing Wisconsin on the experts group, and then we have some focus groups that deal with some of the high priority issues, air, wildlife and fish, and then biosolids and land spreading. Some of you are aware of, there's a few PFAS contaminated properties in Wisconsin that have been documented. So if you want to get more information on those, that includes, I know we'll talk later about JCI Tyco and Marinette. There's some military sites, airport sites, and some other manufacturing sites and landfills. So you can go to, there's a couple ways you can do it. I put the link, a direct link that you can go to. It's called BERTS on the Web, and that's our database where it shows a summary of what's been going on at each of these sites. You can search by site or search by municipality, county. But just go to advanced search and then enter PFAS under the substance, and you'll get something kind of like shown here. You can also just, if you want to Google or use some other search engine, you can just type in PFAS or BOTW Wisconsin or Wisconsin DNR, and you'll get to it that way also. So it's got a lot of different search capabilities. You can find out what's going on at any one particular site. There's hyperlinks to specific documents also. Next. So we are in the process of developing standards. Those do take a while, but for groundwater, we're a part of Cycle 10. The Department of Health Services recommended a combined enforcement standard of 20 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFAS. We're looking at that rule will probably get promulgated in 2022, most likely. As part of Cycle 11, we've asked the Department of Health Services to recommend drinking water standards for 34 other PFAS compounds. We'll probably get I'm thinking about 15 recommendations out of those 34, because there's a lack of data for all those compounds, but they're gonna provide what there is recommended enforcement standards for the compounds that do have sufficient data. Drinking water, we're looking at updating NR 809 with a MCL of 20 parts per trillion, also for PFOA and PFAS. That would apply to municipal water systems. And we're also in the process of developing surface water standards and biosolid standards. There are, someone will probably mention later, there's also there's currently a fish advisory for fish consumption for Starkweather Creek and Lake Monona, and that's on the, more information on that is on the DNR website. Next. We are doing a lot of research, and there's been a lot of research proposed as part of WSPAC. So we are working with UW-Madison, specifically their Sea Grant. They're doing a lot of work on Lake Michigan and tributaries that flow into Lake Michigan. We're also working with the State Lab of Hygiene on analysis of the samples. And so a lot of the research we're doing is related to biosolids, air deposition, through rainwater, I think it mainly is what that is, and then water and fish. We are proposing to, we're planning to collect fish tissue samples this year, and also several surface water samples. We did some last year, as some of you may know, but it seems like we're stepping that up a lot this year. And that includes several samples throughout the Yahara chain. I think Lake Mendota, Lake Monona, Wabisa, Kaganza, because a lot of you, if you're not aware, you will be aware of the contamination that was found at Starkweather Creek, which flows into Lake Monona.
I'm not going to let you get away with it. I've got to change my plane reservation.
Go ahead. Sorry. That's it. So we are coming out with some guidances. These take some time, but some of these are in the public comment period. So we're developing a guidance for biosolids that would provide screening levels for loading rates on an annual basis for fields. An effective disposal guidance document for different types of PFAS waste. So that includes water, soil, sediment, firefighting foam, sludges, biosolids, household products. So it just gives an overview of what the rules are that govern those, and then kind of what the most common practices are to dispose of those, and then a little bit about the fate and transport that we at least do know about with regard to PFAS. And then we're also trying to help the fire departments out. So we're, because of Act 101, which I won't get into here unless somebody asks about it, but that has to do with new rules with regard to firefighting foam use, fluorinated foams specifically. So we're trying to answer a lot of questions basically for those fire departments on how to move forward with that. So it's the last thing I'll leave you with. All the things I've been talking about here, they are on our webpage. So you can just go to type in DNR PFAS on a Google search, and I also put the link here. I know this was kind of a brief overview, so but there's a lot of good information on that webpage. And that's it. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Jason. So our next speaker is Lance Green, who is with the DNR for 20 years and is now retired. He's on the board of the Friends of Starkweather Creek and on the Madison Sustainability Committee.
Well, thank you. And can you hear me? Is everything all right, Cassie? Okay. I think it's all right, Cassie? Just want to be sure.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much, and welcome everyone. I really appreciate people who are interested in something that seems so obscure as PFAS, but as you're finding out, it's not obscure at all. It's everywhere, and so that's something that we're really going to have to deal with for a long time. The silly little picture of me here is when we were able to show the Dark Waters movie here in Madison just before the big shutdown, and there I am standing up there kind of showing how PFAS got into our groundwater and into our surface water at our airport. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that. Next. And here's the watershed of the Starkweather Creek. You can see that it dumps into Lake Monona on the lower left down there, and there's two main branches, one that goes off to the east to the right, and the other one that goes up toward the airport. You see the plane there and the Air National Guard have a base right there. And that's the Air National Guard and the airport have a relationship for many, many years that the Air National Guard was providing the firefighting capability for anyone and everyone who is using the airport. And of course, as you may know, that PFAS were developed and then became in the military, and the firefighting effect became known as so effective that then the AFFF foam use has been required for quite a long time for fighting air fires, plane fires, and any kind of military fires. And so at the Air National Guard there has been a long period of use, maybe 40, 50 years of the PFAS in a couple of places that were called burn pits. And that foam was really just sprayed right onto the surface to put out fires in a couple of places near that Air National Guard area. And so all these years it's been going down into the soil and concentrating in the soil. And we at the Friends of Starkweather Creek are pretty happy to be advocates for the health of our creek all these years. A couple of years ago, we found out about this PFAS issue and been learning more about it and finding out that it's a lot more toxic than the phosphorus or the chloride, that are two other issues that we deal with. And we've been taking people out on this creek for a long time, and kids and adults and everybody, and I'll talk more about that. Next. And this is just a very basic slide from the DNR that I'm sure Jason, maybe he would help put it together, but there you can see the PFAS are in everything, and that Jason talked about the things that we're doing here in Wisconsin to learn a whole lot more and develop standards for the PFAS. And of course, the health effects down on the lower left, you can see there's certain type of cancers. It's definitely doesn't do well for your thyroid, and your thyroid hormone. It's a disruptor for thyroid hormone, and it does cause high cholesterol. That was not on there, which a lot of us have a problem with for sure, and doesn't do too well with our immunity system. So all of that is part of this question and part of this issue of the PFAS. Everybody else asking what you can do. There's a little bit more there about it, but people can ask questions later. Getting your water tested. And if you do find that you have PFAS in the water and you're concerned about it, you can certainly get filters. You can check your state advisories as far as where their PFAS are, and learn a lot more about it on the DNR website. And in the environmental working group nationally, which I don't have there, but if you look up environmental working group, you can find out a whole lot more about what's going on nationally with PFAS. Next. So there we have, this is kind of a nice thing that was put together by the Wisconsin State Journal. Up on the left, you can see some of the main areas with having problems with PFAS. You can see Fort McCoy, Volk Air National Guard, Badger Ammunition Plant, and our Air National Guard base and Air Force Reserve and so forth. So a lot of this is military, and that's what's true all over the country, and military facilities have had this around for quite a long time, and there's been a lot of releases. Down at the lower left, you can see that advisories about PFAS are pretty difficult to do, because there are thousands of PFAS compounds. In the movie, you see a lot about the 8-chain molecules and the PFOS and the PFOA molecules, and you see below there, EPA recommended level 70 parts per trillion. And that's just a health advisory level. It's not a legal level. The EPA does not have PFAS listed as a toxic compound like all the other toxics you've heard about. Listing to do that has been resisted for many years by, I'm sure, the military and the industries that produce it. And so it's been tough to get PFAS regulated on a national and state level because of that. It does not have to be reported by anybody who's releasing it, and the toxic release inventory that some of you may be familiar with. And so that poses a real problem, and it has delayed really action on dealing with PFAS. You can see some more of the levels down there: 20 parts per trillion, 14 to 21. Wisconsin doesn't have specific levels yet, but as you heard Jason, we're working on that here in Wisconsin. Now on the right, you see the Truex National Guard base blown up a little bit here, and the blue is Starkweather Creek going down into Lake Monona again in the bottom. And you can see that the airport is, right there in the city, and we have a well 15. You see to the right there. That's about a mile away from the areas where some of the PFAS had been put into the ground and leaching into the ground. And so that well over the last couple of years has been tested and had to be turned off last year, because the levels of PFAS were getting a little bit higher. You see on the top it says drinking water was 37 parts per trillion for 5 combined, 10 for the 2 combined, and we were locally looking at not being sure not to go over 20 parts per trillion. And so it has, the PFAS are showing up in our drinking water there and in another well that's off to the southeast from there. And so we have been finding it there. That's a major issue that brought this awareness to an awful lot of people. Now, the other thing that's happening there at the airport then is, because over there to the left near Packers Avenue, and then in the red area you see right there, there were 2 burn pits. And not only the Air National Guard, but training programs for other firefighters and firefighters at Madison Area Technical College went on there, training sessions using PFAS for many, many, many years. And so it's not just the Air National Guard that was spreading the PFAS. It was really firefighters wanting to train there and using that area to train. And so that's gone on quite a bit. It's not happening right now anymore at this moment. But I think, okay, yeah, we can go on to the next. One of the things that we have found with taking measurements and such is that there's a high level of PFOSs in the creek, in the groundwater, in the lakes that are fed by Starkweather Creek, and then there's a chain of lakes here in Madison. The top lake, Lake Mendota, doesn't seem to have much PFAS in it. I don't think it's been tested too much, but Starkweather Creek goes into Monona, and then that goes into Waubesa and Kegonsa and the other lakes down below. So the water's been flowing contaminated for a long, long time into our whole lake system. And if you know a little bit about PFAS, they are bioaccumulative, like mercury and PCBs that end up in fish. And you've seen fish advisories about those chemicals all over the place. They are forever chemicals. They last forever. And yeah, you can go back, but you can look maybe to the second page of that. I don't know if you can go down on that or not, but the interesting thing about PFAS compared to mercury and PCBs is mercury and PCBs mostly contaminate and bioaccumulate in the fatty tissue of fish. And so the PFAS are different though. They accumulate in the muscles of the fish. And so that's quite a big deal, because that's the part we want to eat. So you can't just cut out the fat anymore and think that you're safe. And we do have pretty high levels. Can you go to the next page of that one, Cassie? Let's see if you can find that. It was not.
No, it looked like it didn't pull into this. I'm sorry, Lance.
Oh, okay, because that showed the actual fish advisories for the different kinds of fish. And some fish, it says you can eat every week. Some fish you can eat, not once a month. And if And if you're a young person or if you're an old person, you don't want to eat as much because of the toxicity can be more for you. But we do know that it's at very high levels. People ask me, should I eat the fish in the lake? And there are people who are out there fishing every day, but the bluegills and the perch and the kind of fish that people catch every day do have very, very high levels. And so they should follow the fish advisory at least. Those of us who maybe are a little more concerned about it would not want to eat any of those fish at all. You can go to the next slide then, that's fine. The locals, the local health department and the DNR got together and did put signs all around on the areas of Starkweather Creek, especially the West Branch where we have high levels, saying that you should not drink the water. If you get in the water, you should wash immediately and wash off your hands if they get in the water. If your pet is near the water, you can't have your pet drink the water. It's revised against that. If they get in the water, you should wash them off immediately. Well, those advisories are interesting, but I don't think very realistic for most people. I would see that, of course, if you see that, don't get near the water, don't get in it. But in the community around the airport, there has been, we have a lot of minority people who have enjoyed this creek and celebrated it, and we've celebrated it with them for many years. So kids can no longer get in. You can't take your dog in there and run around in the creek anymore, and so it really has had a big effect on using the creek. And so that's something that's been quite an issue here. And so I think I'm going to leave it there. There's a lot more to talk about, but maybe we'll get that in question and answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lance. And now we'll turn it over to Cheryl with Milwaukee Riverkeeper.
Hello, thanks for having me, and I'm really happy to have so many of you guys join us today to talk about PFAS. Move on to the first slide, Cassie. Thank you, ma'am. So I think I just was going to mention a little bit about what's happening in Milwaukee that we're aware of. The first slide is really looking at a Union of Concerned Scientists study looking specifically at military sites and using US military data. And I think this is probably one of the first times that I really started learning a little bit about PFAS and where it was prevalent in the state. You know, they, as part of this, kind of identified those sites. They mapped 131 different military sites at which PFAS contamination was found in either drinking water or groundwater. And then we found out kind of at that time that our military base in Milwaukee and our airport were in that extreme contamination category. So for people who aren't familiar, in downtown Milwaukee, we do have two federal air reserve stations. We have the Air National Guard, the 128th Refueling Wing, and also the 440th Airlift Wing, which subsequently has basically shut down and moved to North Carolina, although we've had a lot of historic military activity at Mitchell. They actually found, you know, the groundwater level contamination levels at General Mitchell were about 985 times what was considered the safe exposure limit set by the, you know, the assessment, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, which is a kind of sub-agency of the CDC. So we clearly had a huge problem. I think that the largest PFAS levels they got were around the 120,000 to 130,000 range in the groundwater. And so we knew that we had an issue there. The most probable, you know, source was firefighting foam. You know, since then, the military has replaced a lot of the older foam, but we, you know, with newer ones that have shorter chains, but they aren't PFAS free, is our understanding. And we do know that, you know, there's been a lot of talk about including funds in the federal budget to deal with a lot of these military-based issues like that we have in Madison and in Milwaukee and other places. But it seems like that funding, unfortunately, just was taken out of the budget, at least from what I heard. Next. So not surprisingly, in addition to the Air Force Base, we also started digging around at General Mitchell Airport, which is essentially at the same overall complex, and found that, you know, a lot of this PFAS, which we already knew was in the stormwater, or sorry, was in the groundwater at very high levels, that it was draining into the stormwater that goes into two different creeks, Wilson Creek, which is a tributary of the Kinnickinnic River, and Oak Creek, which drains the airport from the south. And both of those are tributaries that drain to Lake Michigan, which is obviously the source of drinking water for around 1 million people in southeast Wisconsin and many others. So we found PFAS compounds at 3 different stormwater pipes draining the airport that exceeded minimum thresholds for what we, you know, what are the proposed state groundwater regulations that Jason was talking about. You know, the DNR has ordered the airport to look at sources and extent of contamination and to come up with plans for preventing future discharges. You know, given the very high level contamination, I think we have some concern over how long it's going to take the airport to do the planning. They've also been, you know, largely paralyzed by this COVID outbreak, and you know, there's going to be significant significant economic impacts to the airport as well as other impacts. So that's a concern that we have. We know that the airport itself no longer uses PFAS foams, but they historically used them. And they also suspect that a lot of their groundwater and stormwater contamination is from the federal part of the airport. So in 2019, there was some pretty significant testing where 6 different compounds showed up, including the PFOA and PFOS, which have been detected in obviously other parts of the state. The highest concentration that we had in stormwater of PFHXS, which is, I think, I'm going to screw it up. I think it's perfluorohexosulfonate. I might have botched that. The highest level that we found in stormwater was 80,000 parts per trillion. However, we know that it was in groundwater at much higher levels, around 120 to 130,000. So again, we're not completely surprised. We're starting to find that in the creek. Yeah, and as Jason mentioned, that the new proposed standard for groundwater in Wisconsin is going to be around 20 parts per trillion, PFOA and PFAS. So as far as our drinking water is concerned, in the last 3 years, 2017 to present, and I suspect it might just be that the last 3 years is when they started testing, we have started finding some of this in our drinking water supply, albeit at very incredibly low levels. Milwaukee Waterworks, I think, you know, to their great credit, I mean, they're regulated to test many substances, but they also test over 500 substances, the vast majority of which are unregulated. And they have started finding this popping up. You can see kind of in the graphic at the top, you know, they're finding PFOS, PFOA, and not saying that I've had such a hard time with that, hexosulfonate or that, whatever that is. PFHXA, they're finding it also very high levels. But, you know, again, these levels are well below this, you know, the safety level of 11 part per trillion. And also the EPA current drinking water level advisory of 70, and also well below the proposed new rulemaking that the state is going forward with drinking water and groundwater of 20. Next slide. So just talking a little bit about fish, we don't know a whole lot about what's in our fish. The big study that we have that has some data in it is a study from DNR, which looked at PFCs in Wisconsin fish from 2006 to 2012. And so it summarized the amount of chemicals in 28 fish species from 7 different river systems, including Lake Michigan and Superior, and from 2006 to 2012. And the PFOS was present in the highest concentrations and the highest number of samples. In fact, it was found in 99% of the fish samples in that study. And then there were 8 other PFC compounds that were found in about 30%. So they found, you know, some trends where white bass and centrarchids like crappie, bluegill, smallmouth bass had higher PFAS than other types of fish, but they all had levels that, you know, were detected as part of the fish tissue studies. The longest chain PFCs were found in many species, especially from the Mississippi and Milwaukee. And so just kind of explaining this graph, which is a little bit messy, The kind of graph on the top right of the slide, Milwaukee is at the far bottom left, the far bottom right-hand corner. And kind of the level or size of those purple dots is the PFAS level. And then the other charts that you see kind of on the bottom left are essentially looking at other PFC compounds that were looked at in that study, and they're kind of color-coded based on the key that's to the right. But I think the key to look at really is that those the red and kind of darker oranges are essentially the compounds that had the longer chains, and those are the ones that I think are more bioaccumulative, so they potentially could be a greater risk to human health. But those colors just kind of show you in general, the different types of chemicals that were found in the fish. Again, so about 2% of the Great Lakes fillet, so the samples they took in Lake Michigan and Superior came back with PFAS in excess of a standard that the state of Minnesota is using is what's safe in fish fillets, which is 40 nanograms per gram. And about 29% of the river fish samples came back higher than that. Looking at our Milwaukee specific data, so for folks that are joining us from Milwaukee, the highest levels that we found in smallmouth bass were about 14.9 nanograms per gram, so it's less than that 40 nanograms per gram standard. And then they found 12 nanograms per gram PFAS in walleye, and then those were both kind of taken in the Milwaukee Estuary downstream of Estabrook Park. And then they found some higher levels in black crappie and Grafton of about 17.3. So the most recent data that we have is from last fall. So in fall of 2019, for people who aren't aware, Milwaukee is an area of concern that was designated as part of, by EPA. And basically because of a lot of toxic contamination that we have. So we're, in a similar situation as Green Bay and Menominee and Duluth Superior and other parts of the state that have Great Lakes Area of Concern program. So we're basically planning to start what we hope to be, at least $100 million plus $million of work to dredge a lot of PCBs and PAHs and historic legacy contamination from downtown Milwaukee. And so as part of that, I think the DNR came in and tried to do some water sediment and fish samples in last fall. They came in and really kind of pounded out some sampling pretty quickly. And they looked at 13 different locations on the lower rivers that are kind of shown on the map to the left. And then they looked also at one Lake Michigan location that was fairly close to our drinking water intake for the city of Milwaukee. And they looked for 35 different compounds. And so we did find PFBA, perfluorobutanoate, in 100% of the surface water samples, and those are less toxic than the PFAS and the PFOA, but clearly also still a concern. And they also found PFAS concentrations in sediment and surface waters, and not surprisingly, the highest levels they found were in our Kinnickinnic River, which again is draining the airport and the Air Force Base. So again, they found mostly that perfluorohexane sulfonate at 44.4 parts per trillion in the surface water. Again, we know that we have much higher levels in the stormwater and in the groundwater at the airport, so not surprising. Although I will say this is quite downstream from the airport. I would guess probably about five miles or so maybe. So I'm guessing if we tested a little closer to the airport, we'd find higher levels. But these are basically corresponding with areas that are going to be dredged anyway for other things. So it's kind of where we have results from right now. The good news is that the results near the drinking water intake showed they were lower than the levels of detection, which is good news for PFOA and PFOS. We do know from, what we've heard from DNR that these levels that we found in Milwaukee are essentially less than, what Lance is dealing with in Starkweather Creek. Sorry, Lance, but higher than, some of what the department has found in recent sampling on the Wisconsin, Mississippi, and Menominee rivers. I'm guessing that might be the other Menominee River. So essentially, we know that we have an issue. And in 2019, and there were some fish samples, fish fillet samples taken, but we don't have that data back. And our understanding is that they're going out in 2020 to take additional samples. So hopefully we'll know more by, soon, hopefully by the end of the year. Next slide. So finally, just recommendations, you know, there's a lot of different things that we can do, and I think we'll probably talk about this more in the discussion, but, you know, some of the obvious things seem to be, you know, banning sources of PFAS, including those firefighting foams, and it sounds like from what Jason was talking about, the state's working on that, so we'd be interested in hearing more about that. You know, remediating the contaminated drinking water sources, setting enforceable standards, which we're talking about for drinking water, surface water, and groundwater. Mandating better reporting and providing funds to clean and filter ongoing sources. That's something that we're a little bit concerned about because we know we have an ongoing source from the airport, and we're a little concerned that, you know, the multiple years it might take to get the state standards in place, and also for the airport to do studies that in the meantime we have an ongoing source of this to our drinking water into our fisheries, and it seems like there could be, you know, filtration that would maybe capture some of this stuff, or maybe some other technologies that we could put in the interim. You know, the trick being obviously there's no, you know, approved federal or state standards, so that makes it difficult. There's been some interesting talks about how the state of Michigan has PFAS standards, and because our rivers drain to Lake Michigan, whether or not those Michigan standards could somehow come into play here and forcing some good action by, you know, by dischargers that are going into Great Lakes tributaries. You know, but I think really demanding accountability from the manufacturers and the military for cleaning up their messes, not only in Wisconsin, but across the country. You know, more research and monitoring, like as I mentioned before, we have areas upstream on the Kinnickinnic River we'd like to do more sampling for. We have put in some grant applications to do monitoring, but it's very hard to get funding to do this work. And the sampling, as I'm sure DNR could weigh in on, is very expensive for surface water and fish and sediment. They're hundreds of dollars per sample. You know, we also have areas like Grafton and Cedarburg, West Bend, other areas that we know we have potential companies that were sources of PFAS chemicals. So we definitely would like to do some expanded testing in other parts of our watershed. And I'm assuming that's the truth throughout the state. So, you know, things that we kind of are pondering and would like to start a conversation with Sierra Club and with others about. And that's it for me. And I think moving on to Doug.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Yeah, so former mayor of Marinette, Doug Oetzinger.
All right, can you hear me just fine?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and I can't see myself, so hopefully you're seeing me. My name is Doug Oetzinger. I live in Marinette, Wisconsin. I am the former mayor of the city some years ago, but I'm also a current city council member. And unfortunately, I live in what it appears to be the epicenter of the PFAS contamination in the state of Wisconsin. We have the largest contamination site because we have a company that actually produces PFAS in the form of firefighting foam in the city of Marinette. I became involved in the PFAS issue locally in the spring of 2018. And by the fall of 2018, I joined with some friends who live in the town of Peshtigo to form the SOH2O group to educate the community on our growing PFAS crisis. Now, when you get involved in a volunteer group, one of the things you'll note is that you can never agree on your name. And over time, we kept the initials, but we changed our name. So SOH2O right now stands for Save Our Water, but our logo is Stop Poisoning Our Water, because PFAS is literally poison. In April of 2019, we held a community-wide informational meeting that was attended by well over 100 people in our high school auditorium. A few facts about our contamination here in Marinette. And Marinette's located on the Wisconsin-Michigan border, about 50 miles north of Green Bay. So we're on the Bay of Green Bay, and we're divided by the Menominee River between the state of Michigan and the state of Wisconsin. Tyco, and now Tyco Johnson Controls, has several manufacturing and warehousing facilities in the area. In addition, they have their corporate fire technology center, which functions as their corporate research and development center, and their training center for fire suppression chemicals and technology. I live about 4 blocks away from that facility in the city. In October 2013, Tyco found PFAS in the groundwater at the Fire Technology Center in the hundreds of thousands of parts per trillion. In April 2014, 6 months later, they retested and they confirmed those results. They told no one. They informed no one. They did not report it to the DNR. Now that Fire Technology Center routinely they have outdoor testing areas and training areas where they would literally set off fires, petroleum-based fires, and put them out with firefighting foam. Well, after they demonstrated or trained to put that fire out, they would just simply wash that foam off their concrete pad and into the environment. In November 2016, they reported to the DNR that PFAS had been found on that site, and the DNR ordered them to start testing the surrounding area. Late in 2017, the residents in the town of Peshtigo were told they had contaminated wells, and Tyco Johnson Controls began offering bottled water and eventually point of entry systems, or POET systems, to filter out the two of the many PFAS compounds found in the water, PFOA and PFOS. PFAS has been found in the surface water in drainage ditches that flow into the Bay of Green Bay. The concentrations are so high that Tyco has built a carbon filtration system to remove the PFAS out of the drainage ditch. And I ask you, where else in the state of Wisconsin do you build hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of filtration equipment to filter essentially stormwater that's running down a ditch? PFAS has been found in our wastewater treatment plant and has contaminated the biosolids or sludge that has been routinely spread on agricultural land. Just recently, testing came back this spring that confirmed that wells, private wells, near land where that sludge was spread have been found to be contaminated in an area of approximately 100 square miles. So now we've exported our contamination out of the city by trucks carrying sludge and spreading it on agricultural fields that are 10, 15, 20 miles away from us. The Johnson Controls, or Tyco, is using the same playbook that you saw DuPont use in the movie Dark Waters. It is the same playbook that all polluters use. Delay, deny, deflect, and deceive. The thing to remember is when something is called a forever chemical, it's also a forever problem. This is coming to a neighborhood near you, and if you could switch to the next slide, please. The DNR currently has 30 active sites around Wisconsin. It's in La Crosse, it's in Rhinelander, it's in Madison, it's in Milwaukee, it's in the Manitowoc area, it's here in Marinette. And the only reason that map doesn't have more blue dots is because no one's looking for it. There's no requirement to test for PFAS in your drinking water if you live in a city and you have municipal drinking water, and there's no requirement to test the wastewater treatment plants. There are no regulations on PFAS. We're trying to get some developed. But right now, there are no regulations. The only thing we have that to go on is, thank goodness, Wisconsin has something called the spill law. And anything deemed to be a hazardous substance, if it is spilled into the environment or released into the environment, the DNR can come in and take action. But the DNR actually doesn't have the authority to go to, say, the city of Green Bay and say, we want you to test for PFAS in your water. So it's coming to a neighborhood near you. You just don't know it yet. This will not go away in 5 years. There's not going to be a cleanup of the groundwater under my home. there's not going to be a way to get it out of Lake Michigan. I saw some of the questions that were coming in as, well, can we get it out? No, we can't get it out. It's too vast a problem. There's no way to dig out hundreds of square miles of contaminated soil. It's a chemical that's going to be in the groundwater, and it's going to bleed into the lake. And the only thing we can do is treat it in terms of drinking water and stop having it enter into the environment. So this is we're not going to develop a vaccine to stop PFAS pollution from reaching your community. It is something we're going to be dealing with for the rest of our lives. Now, many of you are much younger than I am, but I tell you, any living adult will be talking about PFAS for the rest of their life, because this pollution problem is not going away. And unfortunately, PFAS is already in the blood serum of virtually every human being on this earth. Literally, it is in every one of you listening to me tonight. So I'd like to pose two questions to end my comments. The first question is, can we stop PFAS contamination from becoming even more toxic in our bodies and in our environment, or will we let it get even worse? And the second question is, will we make those companies that did this to us take responsibility for their careless and reckless actions? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your incredibly powerful comments, Doug, and especially for connecting those back to the movie that so many of us have seen. I feel so confident in knowing that we're with all of you great activists who are going to take on the challenges that Doug posed to us. So preventing this problem from getting more severe, as well as holding corporations accountable. And we have a petition at sc.org/PFAS that calls for that very thing at a national level. And then there are many organizations, and we will follow up with all of you who are attending with more information on all of the groups and the speakers who are on today. But there are many organizations working to make sure that there are strong and robust administrative rules, that our agencies are taking care of this, and that polluters are being held accountable. And so I highly recommend, if you have time and capacity, in supporting organizations that are taking on this big challenge, because it does require all of us to make a difference. So please sign that petition. Please consider getting involved. And at this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite all of our panelists to turn back on your cameras. We'll move into some Q&A at this time. So the first batch of questions that I want to pose, and all of you speakers can chime in as you'd like to, is what actions can we take? What are some solutions? What can viewers who are watching personally do at this time as related to this challenge?
So one of the things our SOH2O group spent a great deal of time on, and also some other folks that we network with around the state, we worked on legislation for Wisconsin. As I mentioned, there actually are no regulatory standards on PFAS, either federally, I think was mentioned by maybe perhaps Lance, that there's a health advisory of 70 parts per trillion combined for PFOA and PFOS, but it's an advisory standard. It's look out, could be dangerous. There are no regulatory standards that say you cannot have any more than this amount of PFAS in your drinking water, or in your groundwater, or in the air, or in the soil. So we worked very hard to get some legislation drafted. We worked very closely with some folks in the state legislature. our state senator, Dave Hansen, Madison's Senator Mark Miller, some folks in the state assembly as well, Representative Shanklin. And the CLEAR Act was introduced, announced by the governor. And of course, it was viewed as a partisan piece of legislation because it was introduced by the Democratic governor and the Democrats in the legislature. So we worked with our Republican legislator in the state assembly, Mr. John Nygren, and we cajoled and begged and pleaded and educated and said, you've got to find a way to get to yes. So he and Senator Hansen worked together to draft a compromise bill, a bipartisan bill. It wasn't as strong as the CLEAR Act, but it had many of the same elements. And we were very, very hopeful. Many of us went down to Madison to testify in favor of that compromise legislation. The good news is it came out of both the environmental committees in the Senate and the Assembly with very strong bipartisan support for the bill. And it got to the state assembly and it died. It was not brought up for a vote. Something else was brought up at the last minute, which actually did more damage than good. So the question was, what can we do? We have to hold people accountable. We have to ask them to support bipartisan legislation that will protect our environment, but quite honestly, literally protect our children. One thing that I don't think was mentioned tonight is one of the tragedies around PFAS is that small children are most affected by contamination of PFAS. And it's a very simple equation. I got a glass of water here. I weigh a lot more than a 2-year-old child. So if I'm drinking contaminated water, it's distributed across my body weight. But a small child that drinks water, and probably going to drink a lot more than I do during the day, they're getting a higher concentration of contamination in their body weight. So this is truly an issue that affects the health of our children. It also affects the health of women who are carrying children, who are pregnant, and it even affects whether or not you're able to get pregnant. So this should be a health issue, this should be a safety issue, this should be an environmental issue that both parties should be able to get behind and support. But we have some very, very, very powerful opponents to state legislation. And I'm not afraid to name them. They are the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce who testified against both bills. And they are the Wisconsin Paper Council who testified against both bills. And one of the things that you will find is paper companies are extremely worried about regulation of PFAS, because if you're making coated paper, there's a good chance you're using PFAS to do it. And they create a sludge that goes in the landfills, and there's leachate from those landfills that end up in wastewater treatment plants. So we have some very powerful forces that do not want legislation passed, do not want the state to take any action. And I can't say it enough. Delay, deny, deflect, and deceive. That's the playbook. That's what's being done right now on that legislation. Scare tactics. And so far, they're winning the day.
Thank you, Doug. Lance, Cheryl, or Jason, do either of you have an answer to that question, what actions people can take at this time?
I'll just say, as Doug said, coming to a neighborhood near you is a very important question. You want to make sure that the water that you're drinking in your community is safe. So make sure that you find out about that. Has your community done testing for PFAS? What are the levels? What are the levels that you have? Personal health issues, of course, are are with all of us now for sure. And should you have a good activated charcoal filter in your home for your drinking water, you know, to take those PFAS out? What about the fish? We need to know a lot more about the levels in the fish and get much stronger advisories for those fish. I think the advisory here in Wisconsin just kind of built on the mercury and PCB advisory, but it's not the same at all. And we should be very, very much aware of it. I mean, we talked about parts per trillion. The fish we found here in Starkweather and Lake Monona, 120,000 parts per trillion, you know, for perch, and walleye, 91,000, bass, 110,000 parts per trillion. You eat one of those fish and you've got the same as drinking water for 6 months or something, you know, in your body just from eating one fish. We have some people here in Madison who fish daily and catch those fish to bring them home to their families to eat. What's wrong with that picture? Is that a health issue? It sure as hell is, excuse me. But we really need to be active about that kind of an issue where some people are getting an awful lot more big doses than others. Something that we should be concerned about in an equity way.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, I think, you know, I think there are some solutions as far as, I think someone posted in the chat, you know, not buying rain gear that has the Gore-Tex, right? Or like there's Gore-Tex and dental floss. There's a lot we can do as consumers, but pressuring these companies to stop producing the stuff that's making us all sick. Like these ongoing sources, it seems like it's crazy to me that they're still putting this in products that we're using, you know, because we also have this huge issue of how we're going to clean up all of this mess that we've already made. But I mean, I think that's a piece to it. But I mean, I think it does need to come down to state legislation, federal legislation. I know there's been a flurry of bills that are probably likely not going anywhere, but looking, you know, at banning firefighting foam, at dealing with that issue, at setting federal standards for PFAS as well. So, I mean, I think that we need to, you know, also hold our legislators accountable, our state legislators, as Doug was saying, our federal legislators, to come up with solutions to these problems. And I mean, and, you know, frankly, the Defense Department, I know is implicated here throughout the country. And, you know, but I mean, they're going to need to find some money to come in and try to start cleaning some of this stuff up, you know, to the extent it's possible. And then at least, you know, funding monitoring, funding treatment, you know, trying to find solutions here. My 2 cents.
This is Jason. I think, I guess my answer to that is that knowledge is power. There's a lot of really smart people that, you know, they're on here right now, but, you know, I see 125 and there's 6 million people in Wisconsin. So I think one of the best things people can do is, you know, be educated like a lot of the people on here are, but let other people know about what's going on, because a lot of people don't know much about PFAS, and that's not necessarily their fault, because a lot of products have PFAS in them and it's not even on the product label. And that's something people have brought up and are pushing for better transparency. But, you know, people talk about legislation, that's correct, that, you know, that's the way this gets addressed, but the legislators, they react to what they're hearing from people in the public.
Yep.
Thank you all. So we are a couple minutes after 8, but I still see a lot of really great questions in the chat box. So I do want to take 1 or 2 more questions before we hop off. There were a lot of questions about, I saw them coming up in the chat box about products and how this is in so many products. I'm wondering if any of you have insight on resources people could use, or you could even drop them in the chat if they're looking to change their buying habits and hopefully disincentivize these companies that are using this in their products. So if anyone has any resources, I think that'd be really appreciated.
I think there's some good resources online. I know a source of information that I've always found really helpful is ITRC. So it's India Tango Romeo Charlie. They have a lot of they have some really good YouTube videos about PFAS. But yeah, it's you know, I hear about PFAS being in Teflon and Gore-Tex and floss and stain repellents on upholstery, but then you also hear claims that these manufacturers aren't using this stuff anymore. They're using other types of products, but then what exactly are those products? I don't know. Some of those I think are proprietary. So I don't think I have a good answer. Unless unless there's more transparency on product labels.
Yeah, the other thing that they will tell you, our products do not contain PFOA, or our products do not contain PFOS. Well, there are thousands of PFAS compounds. So maybe your product doesn't contain PFOA, but it has this new generation of 6-carbon PFAS stuff, and research that's starting to come out says this stuff is just as dangerous as the other stuff. We just haven't studied it as much as we've studied the other stuff. So you have to be very scrupulous in reading the labels or reading the advertising when they say it doesn't have this. Are you saying it has no PFAS of any type, or are you only saying it doesn't have this specific one? And one little example of what did we do to change our habits? Well, we don't buy microwave popcorn anymore. My wife got us a nice thing for making popcorn the old-fashioned way in a microwave. I mean, we still make it in a microwave, but we don't buy that bag that's got the PFAS coating inside the paper bag.
Great, that's really helpful. Another question for all of you. What do you see as the role for community organizations learning more about this issue?
Well, I think, events like this are really important. I think just as to Jason's point, I think a lot of people don't even know this stuff exists. And I mean, I work on water, but frankly, this is a fairly new issue for us even over the last couple of years, just because we're dealing with, as others mentioned, phosphorus chloride and sewage and a bunch of other stuff that we work on. And so, there's a big learning curve, but I think getting information out to people is really important. Like I had found out, I didn't realize that stuff was in dental floss until I saw it on one of the flyers, and and found out my dentist is giving out, dental floss with this stuff in it, and she wasn't aware of that either. So I let her know that that's really bad. She shouldn't be giving this floss out to all of her patients, and she changed. And so I think a lot of it's, a big part of it, I think, is awareness, and certainly, getting people to to use their voice on, to support state legislation, federal legislation. I think it is a big, something that a lot of community organizations could do as well. Maybe organizing, I know we've organized on microbeads, we've organized on, we have a coalition that's trying to fight single-use plastic and endorsing businesses that are doing the right thing. So, I mean, I think there is probably an element of consumer pressure too that we could lay to bear on some of these products and some of these companies that are still producing this stuff.
I'll reflect what Jason said. Get to know. It's the most important thing, probably, is just get to know, have a showing of this great movie that you've all seen now for your group. I think it's very much worth it. It's definitely a movie that gets you fired up. If you've seen it, you know that. And there was a public TV special. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Maybe one of the other people knows that, but a real good show about PFAS with a lot more detail in it. You can research on the web and find some really good things that can explain what this issue is and how vast it is.
All right, Lance, are you talking about The Devil We Know?
Yes, absolutely. It's on Netflix.
Yeah, it's on Netflix and I think Amazon Prime too. But and yeah, The Devil We Know is, and some of the actual people in The Devil We Know had little walk-on roles in Dark Waters. If you had seen both, you went, oh, that's a real person.
Great. So the last question, I would love it for each of our panelists to answer this. this, I know, and I think we all know how hard continuing to work, especially on forever chemical issues, can be. What keeps you going, or what gives you hope to continue doing this work? And why should people continue doing this work when it's heavy and difficult? Doug, maybe you wanna start with that one.
Well, obviously I'm a political person, having been a mayor and being on the city council, and that usually reflects some connection, some concern, some desires for something to happen in your community, wanting it to be a certain type of community. And I'd never heard of PFAS until 2018. What's that? That's 4 letters. I didn't know what that was. And suddenly I found out that a local company in my community that I had always had regarded as a good corporate citizen, had their employees in the parades, donated money to community events, had been poisoning us, had been poisoning the environment for decades, and they knew it. Now, it's just not in me to roll over and say that's life. There's a justice issue here. There's a health issue here. I have grandchildren. They don't live in my community, but they live in the valley. Got a lot of paper companies down there. When you see an issue like this, you've got 2 choices: address it or pretend it doesn't exist. And this was one I couldn't pretend didn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in that, I mean, I think this work is really important. And, you know, and I think I'm also angry because, you know, we have the right to clean, fishable, swimmable, drinkable water, right? It's in the Clean Water Act. We're supposed to have it by 1987. We're still waiting for it. But, you know, we've worked really hard. I mean, not only in Wisconsin, but nationally and in Milwaukee. I mean, we've worked hard to improve our sewage treatment. We've gone from like 50 overflows a year to 2 to 3. I mean, we've removed 11 dams. We're working really hard on removing fish passage obstructions. You know, we've seen massive benefits in fisheries. And, you know, so it's the fact that we might have to tell people not to eat the fish. You know, we already have a fish advisory for BCBs, but, you know, if we have to tell that there's a certain amount that people can eat per week or per month, but if we have to tell people they can't eat fish from our river, you know, we've spent a lot of time and money and really good work on behalf of the community, you know, improving our fisheries and busted our behinds to improve water quality and improve the fish that are in our rivers. And, you know, their fishing has become a huge, you know, tourism industry for not only for our area, but for Wisconsin. And so the fact that we would be robbed of that by this chemical, you know, it makes me really angry. And, you know, it's hard because people are asking us, they've seen the coverage in the paper and they're saying, well, should we not eat any fish anymore? Should we not go into the water? You know, and we want to protect health, but we also feel like, you know, damn it, it's our right to use these rivers and these lakes, and they should be clean enough for everybody to use. And if they're not, we need to fight for that. But anyway, that's, I guess, what kind of keeps me going. And also, you know, I think Lance mentioned, we have people out there subsistence fishing, and regardless of, you know, you tell them only to eat 1 fish a month or whatever, they're out there every day because they're eating that for their, you know, catching fish for their families. So I think we owe it to them as well. To do the work and to do the education and to try to, you know, make things better.
Well, I'll be brief, but way back in long ago, long ago, I had a high school biology teacher, and she had us all read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And we learned about the DDTs. You know, there's those letters. And what in the world was that? And it was killing off the eagles. It's like, what's going on here? And from that time, I think that had a big influence on me. And because from that time, I've tried to be aware of what are the problems that the humans are creating with all these wonderful products and all these PCBs and PCAs and PCEs. I mean, we've got PCEs underneath my house in the groundwater. We had to do a lawsuit about that. you've got all these problems going on, and it seems to me the only thing that we can do is care and make things happen. And if we don't care, things won't happen. I know Wisconsin has a really big core of people who care about the environment, and we always had. And so I really appreciate that tradition in my heart because I resonate. The other thing I resonate with is we take hundreds of kids out on the creek, and adults and babies and in their arms even sometimes in the canoe. And these kids, they're picking up every little bit of litter and they're asking about the creek and they want their future to be well and their parents are wanting their future to be well. And we aren't even doing that anymore because we don't even want those kids to dip their hands in the water and then wipe their nose. How sad is that? So you've got a situation here that really speaks to the heart. If people know about it, I think it'll speak to their heart, and I think that's going to be a motivating factor for a lot more people. So it keeps me motivated to think that we will actually turn the tide, and something positive is going to happen out of this. I mean, it's going to take decades and decades and decades for those fish to be clean again in our lakes. We don't even know how long. It might be a century. Who knows? Because these last so long. So just got to keep at it and keep your heart on it. It's easy. It's a lot easier to just give up and watch TV or something.
Yeah, this is Jason. So I've been working at the DNR since 2012, and I was a spills coordinator for several years. But the main reason I took this position is I know PFAS is a big deal and it's not going away soon. I know the current administration is pretty big on addressing PFAS, but I don't think it's going to, regardless of, what happens in the future, I don't think it's going to go away. Every once in a while, a new chemical comes around that catches us by surprise. And I think it's been a long time since a group of chemicals, came at us like this one has. It's kind of a perfect storm. It's very toxic. The proposed enforcement standard is 20 parts per trillion. I think there's only a couple compounds that have lower enforcement standards than that, maybe like dioxin and PCBs. Most enforcement standards are measured in parts per billion. But that in combination with the fact that PFAS are so mobile and they're so prevalent, it's kind of a perfect storm. So I think I'm pretty excited. I know DNR is taking this very seriously. We got 6 brand new people that are working exclusively on PFAS right now. So I think there's going to be a lot of new things coming in the next few years.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for leaving us with so much inspiration to keep doing this work. I think I challenge everyone who is on this webinar tonight to tell at least one person about what you learned here, and I highly encourage you to check out the organizations that were represented and get involved. And we'll follow up via email with contact information for all the groups represented. And thank you again for tuning in. Sign our petition, tell your friends about this issue, and get involved when there are public comment periods that come up. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great night.